morning. This is Gaming Perspectives with
Saul?
and Jolene. And today we're talking about what if the GM is wrong?
Oh my God. But they're never wrong, Jolene.
I don't know.
So I hear this. I've been hearing this I've been at this game for quite a bit, this role-playing gig thing. And for the most part, I think most people in the past have always said that the GM is God, right? They control everything.
I think that's just in your brain. I've never really heard people say the GM is God.
At the role-playing game table, yes, because they create the world, they control NPCs, they make up the adventures, they arbitrate the rules.
I believe that's the term that most people use these days. They arbitrate the rules.
Well, but they interpret the rules or they know the rules. Though in recent times, I think most newer role-playing games, a lot of newer games have kind of dissipated that idea.
I think that has to do with the idea of the adversarial GM, that the GM is like, he's in charge and he always makes all the rules and he's trying to kill us. He doesn't like me to do what I want to do. I think that changed a lot of the way they actually wrote it into the rules, saying
Kill
the GM is not trying to kill you.
Yeah. Well, I was thinking along the lines that I haven't really thought about the adversarial GM, though they do exist, and I don't know how they exist now, but they are out there, like new adversarial GMs.
Yes, because people are always get really upset when they run into one.
So one way that this idea about GMs having total control over the role-playing game table is there's been a number of newer ideas or ideas that have changed the way the game is written, the rules are written. For example, narrative control. There's a lot of newer games that take away some of that narrative control from the GM and give it to the player. And then there's even another idea is tight rules. If the rules are really well written and there's less room for the GM to be able to call blue lightning and kill your character.
Okay, I want to say something about the narrative control.
Oh, okay.
I'm confused.
It goes to the player.
I know what it means, but I don't remember any rules that are written where the players have the narrative control.
Oh, there's a lot of rules. There's a lot of rules.
Can you give me an example?
Okay, I will give you an example. Let's say any cipher system game.
Oh, that's the system I couldn't figure out.
I don't know if you couldn't figure it out. I don't think you've ever played
That was
Numenera. I don't think that's the only game that I've ever run or played in. No, that's not true. No, that is true. But every
when he's done having a conversation with himself, he'll tell us something.
Every Numenera game has the ability of the person to add something to the situation.
Now, we have played GM-less games, and I'm using air quotes because we had to have two people figure out how to do that, where the players are making the narrative, right, as you're going, right?
Yeah.
But that was the Lindworm game.
Well, that is one of the things that I said. There's GM-less games where the rules are written to be done without a GM.
But even what I'm saying is when it was written to be done without a GM, we had to have two GMs figure out how to get us to be able to do that.
Okay, so because it's such a weird concept, that game, and other games probably like it, there is what they call a facilitator, someone who has read the book, who has maybe played once or twice. In another game, their knowledge is used to tap to be able to play the game easier. Because some of those games, there is a
learning curve.
Yes, exactly. So other games that allow you to have narrative control is by use of chips, like plot point chips and stuff like that.
That's a good one. I like that. That's like Fate, where you give us the Fate.
Fate
chips.
Does it. The Savage Worlds, any 2D20 system, depending on what rule set they have, you can actually expend a chip to be able to add something to the scene, like physically in the scene. Like, I want to swing off from the chandelier. And in these games, use plot points to do that or to change the scene. There's a door, there's a window here, which the GM never said there was or wasn't there. Those kind of games allow the player
Add to it.
to take narrative control of the scene, the situation.
But usually when you're using a fate chip or a plot point or a Benny or whatever it is, it's because something bad has happened and you don't want it to go that way.
Well, a lot of times it's to save your butt kind of chip.
I want to reroll. I'm going to give you this chip.
Yes, exactly. Or I have a chip, I'm going to expend it to be able to not get hit or reroll my miss or my save.
Or I'm going to save. I'm going to change my miss into a hit or my miss into a I'm not dead, right? Or
yeah, exactly. It's to save your butt, like to get another saving throw, whatever. It could just negate the hit. Like, oh, I don't want to get hit this time. Here's a chip. Depending on the game, some of those games that have chips, plot points, whatever you want to call them, there's different strengths as to what you could use them for.
But if the GM is wrong, he might say, "No, that's not the way that chip works."
What are we talking about? What is GM? Okay, well, let's continue.
Oh yes.
So many times the GM's knowledge seems all-knowing because usually they actually read the book.
They're usually the ones who got the rules and read them and want to run the game, right?
Right, exactly. So they usually read rules, hopefully all of them, at least once or twice. I know that's probably much what I try to do. If I'm going to run a game that is like I want to run the game as it's intended and not as it.
And Saul doesn't always do that. Saul doesn't always want to run the game as intended.
Well, especially crunchy games, right? Because I was trying to run, it's based on the Zoolander rules, Flames of Freedom, and they have an action point economy where you spend action points to be able to move, to fight, or whatever. And I decided, well, this is just a one shot over I think we're playing online.
Yeah.
And I decided, no, I'm just gonna just use a regular old like D&D style. Your turn, my turn, your turn, my turn type of thing. And it worked out fine. And then the next time I played in it, the GM made a specific smart ass comment to me. It was Bay, who's supposed to be my friend, said, well, I'm going to run the Flames of Freedom, but I'm going to use the real rules. What he said. Well, to my chagrin. So I've run a lot of games and I played in a lot of games and I played under a lot of GMs and some of them have been like, they know all the rules, right? They're like, wow, you guys know all the rules. And for me, my first GM, my brother Felipe, who ran AD&D, well, original D&D, and then we moved to AD&D. To me, it seemed like he knew all the rules, right? We would play, and he would make a ruling, and we'd do it, right? And mainly because I had never really read the Player's Handbook. I mean, I read the Player's Handbook. I've never really read the GM's Guide. And it was that tome with the big demon on it, right? With the big old fire sword. And it was like, oh, I wasn't allowed to look at that book, right? Because it had secret information, especially that gem table. That was a really secret information. Anyway, so he was very good at this running the game. And another GM from my history is Mark, who was really well versed in Traveler. I mean, he knew those rules back and forth, knew all kinds of history, and he even started a Zine. He had a Zine that lasted like 20 episodes or 20 issues, where he would draw things and give them specifications and all that, and then people would order them, and he'd
send them out.
You go to the old way was to stamp an envelope and all that. Another way you can get away with players thinking that you know the rules is being very, very good at improvisation and very, very good at quick thinking on your feet, reacting to a situation, and it's so seamless. It's like when you have to make that kind of a ruling of any kind, and it just flows right out of you. People go, man, this guy really knows his stuff.
Some people say that.
Well, regardless, but that's what happens, right? So people who run games really well and their GM style is really whatever GM style they have, but they just make rulings and they make decisions on the fly, and it seems like they're making those decisions on knowledge that you may not have as a player.
So that is like what you're talking about is the GM is the one that read the book This was a while ago, right? There usually is a player's handbook, a GM handbook, and a
Right.
monster manual. And if you're a GM that doesn't want your players to read the monster manual and know all the monsters you're going to bring at them, you're going to say, don't read that.
They're not going to listen.
If they're boys, they're not going to listen. Like Augustine and his friends, they read all the books. But that is different than now. Now there are actual plays to watch. There are most people when they do, if they want to play a game, they're going to read the rules one way or another online. They don't have to go and buy a book, right? Maybe they do, but sometimes they don't.
Right.
So there's a lot more information accessible to all the players. So even if you're a new player and you go, oh, I want to play a D&D 5th edition. I saw this actual play and this is the way that it works. And a whole bunch of people watch it. Your friends watch it and then they read the stuff, right?
Right.
And they're like, okay, everybody has their own idea of how everything goes. So
Right.
then whoever's the GM, if it's an older GM or if it's one of your friends who's a GM, if it's your friend, you're probably going to go, that's not the way that I read it, right?
Well, I mean, the big problem is that they don't usually have that kind of discussion, I don't think, when you first start playing, right?
Right.
I don't think there's a general, well, did you guys, like, I never really, well, actually, I did, because I couldn't understand the rules, was in Shadowrun. I kept asking, well, what does this say? What does this mean? How are you supposed to do combat? We were having a general discussion about how to do it, and it was like around the table, and there was one guy, Jason, who was very well versed in it, and so he tried to explain it to us, and I know he explained it to me at least a dozen times before I'm like, oh, I think
He even made cheat sheets for everybody.
I think I am starting to understand after 12th time. But usually that doesn't happen, right? I don't think, and at least it hasn't been very often that something like that happens. But it may happen more often than I know.
Well, with that one, the boys all read the entire book.
Right. So a part of that is, along with reading the book and making your character, is especially if it's a crunchy rule set, they make characters to, for example, like D&D or Shadowrun, they make characters who are very, what is it?
They have a specific skill set.
Yeah, and they're very good at what they do.
Yes.
Right. Another thing is that D&D 3.0 and all the way through to D&D 5th edition, making a character usually involves combat, right? Because crunchy games, they're crunchy because usually combat is a big factor in the game. That's when there's a lot of rules. And so when you make that character, you're hoping to make the character as efficient or to do things very well. And I think games that go against that kind of thing is like Fate, right? Where you have five aspects, which are basically just phrases that can be used positive or negative against your character. Compare that to like D&D 5th edition, where you have attributes, skills, and stuff, right? And most of those skills are geared toward fighting, living.
Depending on the kind of character you want to make.
Yeah, living in a medieval world where there's monsters everywhere. So that happens, and when characters are making the rules or making their character for that, that's what they want to do. There's a specific way to make a character, or the specific way that they build a character to get the results that they want. And what happens is in combat, they test this.
The skills that they created.
Right. Their skills in creating a character to have this kind of whatever function that is. So that happened to me in Pathfinder. We were playing Pathfinder, and one of my players, even though, okay, so Pathfinder, we had a campaign. I started another one, and everybody's made new characters. And we were playing in Golarion, which is the world of Pathfinder. And it's a high magic, high adventure type of world. But at the time, I didn't want a high magical item littered throughout the world, right? So in my mind, I wanted to limit magical items and therefore make magic a little bit less common. I didn't relay that to my players, and one of the players made a character. I forget what kind of character class it was, but a character class in where about 4th or 5th level, he would be able to start making magical items. So about 4th or 5th player, he goes, I want to make a +1 magic sword or something like that.
And the GM didn't read the character sheet?
I don't know what GM it was, but he did it, and I didn't. And therefore I was surprised. I'm like, what are you talking about? Oh, I have this feat, this meta magic feat. I forget. In Pathfinder, there's gazillions of feats. And I'm like, oh yeah. I'm not allowing you to make this. That was my moment, right? I'm like, oh man, I messed up. And he was really upset because he really wanted to be able to make weapons. I go, look, I just, my idea was, and I didn't, like I said, my problem was I didn't relay that to the players, and here I am imposing this rule that I didn't really tell anybody, but because I didn't think that players could do this. Because I hadn't really read those rules. I mean, there's a lot of rules to Pathfinder, and I hadn't read every feat, every meta magic feat, and all this stuff. So I'm like, no, I'm not going to allow that. And he was very upset. I'm like, look, you can make another character, same level and everything. I just don't want people making magical items. I don't want that to be I don't want it to be a deal in my world. And he made another character, and he was pretty good about it. But I had made a mistake, and I've made mistakes in the past. Usually, it's like a rule. This was like in Pathfinder, like a rule that I made or a ruling that I made that was was in contrast to the rules. Like another one was, this was in 5th edition, was shooting from behind an object, right? And
Saul doesn't like it if you try to shoot from behind an object.
Well, the problem was that, and I didn't understand the rules enough to realize that I could shoot at him, theoretically. So this one person was behind a wall. He'd pop out, shoot his arrow, then pop back behind a wall. He said he could do this. I'm like, I don't think you can, because what about your movement? And he said, I could cut my movement and use half my movement and move, and then move again. I'm like, I don't think you can. And he goes, yeah, I can. And he read the rules, right? And he read me the rule. And I'm like, it sure seems like, how do I hit you? So the problem was that I didn't understand the rules enough. So what I could have done is have the enemy character do like I forget what it is, not a pause action, but ready action, hold action, so they could hold an action
until he popped out,
like Overwatch in, let's say, Warhammer 40K, and then when he popped out, I could shoot and try to hit him. But I didn't know the rules well enough, and I didn't understand that, so I'm like, no, I'm not going to allow you to do that. And it was the same guy too, it was the same player. And he got a little upset, and I'm like, well, you go ahead and do it, and let me read up the rules. And I think I told everybody on the air already on the previous episode that I was online with D&D Raw, and some important guy from D&D, I forget which one guy it was, whether it was Crawford.
Explained it to you.
And he said, indeed, you could do that in the rules. And I told him, well, that's
a stupid rule.
That's a stupid rule, and I just quit the group right there, Facebook group.
That is not true.
I didn't know. I just quit the group because I'm like, well, this is ridiculous. I could care less.
So you've said all of these things just to get to the
because
the GM is wrong?
Because I made a mistake, right? And I was able to mitigate that in certain times. I said, okay, you could go ahead and do that. Let me look at the rules. Or, I'm pretty easy about rules, right? Especially because I may not read the entire book from front to back, just because I just don't have enough time to read all the rules in all the games that I have. So I tend to fudge the rules, or my idea is if it doesn't make sense, I don't like the rule, right? So there's that.
That's his idea, and a lot of times the players have to argue for themselves that this rule does make sense.
But I'm also very open to people questioning the ruling that I make, and I understand that, and that's fine. So Jolene was looking on Reddit, and there was this guy who had a cleric who was able to use a concentration spell, and that's a spell that lasts a long time. And as long as he keeps his concentration, the spell keeps going. I forget. I'm not sure, but in the old days, there was a spell called Spiritual Hammer.
That Steve used that.
Yeah, so it would be attacking people, and he would be able to
do other stuff.
Attack.
Saul hated that.
Well, because he gets to attack twice, right? So this Spiritual Hammer is this ghostly hammer that's hitting people.
But that's what concentration spells do.
Right. So that's what the guy said. So that I don't know what spell it was. Do you remember what spell?
I don't know what spell it was, but I know that the GM did not like it because by having that, it's like the spiritual hammer out there, right?
Yeah.
they don't mean that you are literally staring at it and making it
It's
work.
like in the back of your
It's just
mind.
in the back of your
Yeah,
mind,
yeah.
right?
And you can actually have
And
combat.
and you can do other stuff. And the only things that if you get knocked out, it goes away.
If you get hit
If
by a
you
weapon
get hit by a weapon,
or hit, you have to make a concentration check.
and so it still is there unless you don't make the check, right?
Right.
So,
Right.
but this GM said no.
Well, no, he told the player that that's overpowered. That's too much.
Well, I'm not going to allow that.
So he didn't want to allow it, and the guy goes, "Oh, no!" He actually told him that he got the rule wrong. So this guy was supposedly a new player, right? That he called himself new, and I use quotes, and he was new to role playing, and that this was one of his either was his first game ever.
It was the first campaign.
But he had been playing for a year.
The campaign had been going on for a year.
Right, until this situation happened. And then at one point, he gets a spell that he can use, and he can probably Spectral Hammer. It's one of the best spells.
It has to be. Yeah.
And so the GM saw that this cleric was like kicking butt.
Which is what clerics are supposed to do, by the way.
No, they're just supposed to heal people, honey. That's all they are. And absorb some damage every once in a while. But anyway, so the GM made a ruling that he thought it was overpowered and that he couldn't do that anymore. So he kept playing, and then he didn't like the way his cleric was hobbled because he couldn't throw a concentration spell, and if he threw a concentration spell, that's all he could do. So he played a few times, and he really felt hobbled. He used the term nerfed, which I didn't really understand until I'm thinking nerf is spongy, so it makes it, it's like weaker, I guess. I don't know. Safer. I don't know what the thing is, but it's a very common term in role-playing and video games. And he didn't like it. Wasn't having this.
But he wasn't sure how to tell the GM.
Well, and not only that, he did some research. So he Googled it, and he reread the rules. And the way what he found out is that he was right. He could definitely use a concentration spell and still do other actions. There were things that could cause you to make a concentration check and lose the spell, but until something like that happened, he could do other things, run around, probably even attack with his club or mace, and still have Spiritual Hammer running around. So his quarry or problem was approaching the GM about it, right? Because he was like, well, do I approach the GM because I don't want him to be kicked out of the game? I don't want to make him mad. And then he's really not going to like me. And then he's really going to hobble my character even more or whatever. So what would you do in this situation, Jolene?
Well, there's different things you can do, different tactics as a player you could take, right? One,
a lot of it too is context, right? Who is this GM?
Well,
right?
Yes, I was getting to that.
Okay,
Mr. Morales. So there's different ways you can do it. One, you could do the self depreciation part. Would be like, I'm confused. I thought that I could do this. That's what I thought the rules said, right?
Right.
Or you could say, I thought this was a test versus dex, not strength. What am I missing, right? That kind of
right.
That
You're
kind of
asking
thing.
the question.
So you're asking a question
instead of telling them.
Yeah. Or you could say, hey, shouldn't it be this instead? And that's a more direct approach, right? But then for those two ideas, right, you put that out there in the middle of the game. The other idea is just to go along with it until you're out of game, and then you talk to the GM and say, okay, this is what it says in the book. Why are you saying I can't do it?
Well, yeah, I think definitely talk to the GM about this situation outside of the game without anybody else around.
Well, and it depends on that's where the social context comes in, right?
Yes.
If the GM is your friend and you know this person really well and he doesn't mind being corrected or ask questions,
right?
Which that's the way Saul plays, right? You can just ask him, what do you mean I can't do that? And
yes.
I thought I read it this way.
Right. And I think for me it's mainly because I know I don't know all the rules. And I start from that foundation. And I've been wrong so many times before about rules that I'm like, I'm not gonna stick to my guns.
Right.
Except for like when I've explicitly read something. I remember there was a player who challenged me on a monster. I don't think a monster can do that. I go, yes, they can. Really? I go, yes. and I remember specifically that the monster could do it because I go, wow, that's pretty neat. And it's just, and this was
That was 3.0.
no, I think it might have been 3.0, it might have been Pathfinder, but they had to do with what do you call it, innate ability, special ability, and so all that stuff mattered a certain way because if it was innate or special, you could counter it or not counter it, or it was all kinds of mess. But because I read the rules and I had actually looked at the monster going, and I specifically looked at this monster because I really liked the monster, and so I read it and I read it again, much like when I used Joe Tongue, the orc,
The troll,
and
with all those heads.
with all the heads, and then there was a rogue who was trying to sneak up on it, and because he has 9 heads, it is impossible to sneak up on it, and so he rolled to sneak before he even asked me. He goes, I'm gonna sneak, and he rolled the dice. He goes, and he rolled really well, and I go, he can't sneak up on him. He goes, are you sure? I go, yes, I'm sure. And to his chagrin, both those cases, each player, and there were different players, they were both a little bit miffed by my ruling, which was not a ruling. It was just what the rule said. So then afterwards, one of them, I think it was a, oh my God, I can't remember what it was. But the monster, the player looked it up and later on emailed me saying, oh yeah, you were right about that. I go, yeah, I know. I read the rules.
There's the difference. You can point it out. You can say, right, I think this is the way it should be. But if the GM says, no, this is the way we're going to go, then that's when you need to stop. Because if you keep doing it after that, then it becomes rules lawyery, right? Where you're challenging people at the table versus just playing the game.
Well,
that's the other thing, is that it depends on the kind of group. Are the people your friends? Do people have in the middle of the game stop to have to rule discussions about what you can or can't do, right?
Right.
Can that character really do that, right? And I've been in both kind of games, but a lot of times I play with a lot of GMs, so they're very concerned with, are you sure you can do this way? And then someone wants to look it up, and so it's a more kind of, it interrupts the role playing part, but it also gives them peace of mind that oh yeah, you can do that. And then a lot of times they say, well, this is what the rule says, but I don't think I think it's better the way that we're doing it, right?
Right. We've done that before, house rule stuff.
Yeah.
So a lot of it has to do with tact, right? Like, what's the situation? Like Jolene said, if you know the GM and known him for a while and is a friend, then approaching him, even though it might make him upset, not going to get kicked out of the game or whatever. If it's a one shot at a table at a game store or a convention, who cares? If it's at a game store but it's an ongoing game where this is like a paid GM or whatever, then I would probably point it out, say, look, this is what I looked it up, and again, not at the game table. Either email them or talk to them before the game or after a session. Say, hey, can I ask you a question or whatever? And then talk to them and see explain your side of the story or your interpretation of what you read. And then also tell them this, especially this cleric player, say, you know what? Ever since you made that ruling, I really feel like my character's really suffered and is not as good as I believe he should be.
So then you can say, if you're going to keep that kind of rule, I'd like to change what I'm doing.
Can I change the character and make a new character of the same level or whatever? Because
can I swap out this spell for that spell or something like that?
Or even something easier like that. But you can even change the character, and that might have quite a bit of a change because the GM has to make a decision. Well, one, is the evidence that is given to them good or convincing enough to change his ruling, and whether he likes it or not, or whether he thinks it's overpowered or not, that's the rules. So that if that GM is gonna still say, well, I still think it's overpowered, I'm still not gonna allow it, then you should say, well, can I change characters?
Well, because there's two kinds of groups with GMs, right?
Right.
There's the group where the GM is the final arbitrator, and that's what he says that's the way it's going to be. Yeah, and then there's groups where the players can go to the GM and say, no, that's not the way the rule says it, and I don't think that you should make that rule. You should do that arbitrarily, right?
Arbitrarily, yes. And I think you're right. I think there's different types of GMs out there. There's some hard nosed guys, other guys, but hard nosed GMs that do not won't budge. Right? They believe that they're right, and I tend to stay away from those GMs.
Well, and that's where the idea of the arbitrary GM comes in, right? That they're against you because you're giving
The
them
adversarial GM.
adversary. Yes, sorry, you're giving them proof that this is the way that it's written,
And it's not
they're
convincing.
like, going, no,
I don't care.
I don't care.
Right.
That's the GM I would walk away from and not
Yes.
play in anymore.
Yeah, because you're not going to have fun.
Right.
Because if you build a character a certain way, they could arbitrarily say, "I don't like it. It's overpowered. I'm not going to allow that." And you're like, "Wow, okay." That's tough. That's tough when you're in that situation. And I think you can either change characters or stop playing. But this guy's been playing for
A year with
year.
the same group.
with the same group, so
So
they
he
know
probably
each other.
knows them.
Yeah, they know each other a little bit more. Even if they just got together. I mean, when you've been playing for a year, you know everybody in the group pretty well, I would think, unless it's a very strange situation. I mean, unless it's like you play at a game store and you all like live miles and miles away from each
You
other.
meet 5 minutes before the game and you leave 5 minutes
Yeah,
after
and
the
there's
game.
no other kind of interaction. Yeah, I think we covered it. I think we talked about the different types of GMs. Whether there is that idea that, well, just go along and to get along kind of thing was one of your answers. I think that would work only if it's a one shot to me. If it's something like this guy whose cleric is continually being hobbled or nerfed in every session, then you're like, you feel like something's been taken away from you that you should have, and you feel picked on, or however you want to look at it, then I would definitely have a conversation with the GM. A one shot, I say, yeah, whatever. I'll just not worry about it. I understand.
But in a one shot, if the GM is totally wrong and you know they're totally wrong, it's a convention game, and at the end of the convention game, do you tell him?
Oh,
hey, you're reading that rule completely wrong. I just want you to know this for the next time you run the game,
Oh, that I mean, and that I've heard.
especially if you don't know them.
I've heard that conversation before with people. The people have gone, "Oh, I think you got this rule wrong." And you go, "Really?" And they'll have like a 5 or 10 minute discussion after that. And I'm like, "I'm out of here.
I don't need to hear this.
I don't want to hear this conversation." But they do have that has happened, and
I think that happens because people who play role playing games actually think about stuff and read the rules, and even if they like it's a one shot and they wanted to try the game, they
Right.
may have read something about it or watched an actual play.
or they even have the book.
Yeah,
I
and
just want to say, I want to see how the rules are played.
right.
How it
And
works.
then they might have questions for the GM afterwards if they didn't do it the way that they read it.
Yes, a long time ago. Well, not a long time ago, but pretty much every fake game I ran, my Dresden files, my moderated Dresden game that I ran quite a few times, I would tell them, I go, look, I'm not a fate GM. I'm using the fate rules, but I don't use them exactly the way they say that I use them. So if you're here to see how fate core works, this is not the game to be playing in. I'm running a role-playing game where the basic system is fate, but I'm not using the rules as written because I have a hard time understanding those rules.
Well, see, and that's important, I think, for GMs to let people know, right?
Right. And I tell them, I ran a World War II game, and I said, look, I'm not a World War II expert. I am not. So
I suggest you should say that when you run a Star Trek game.
I've done that in Star Trek exactly because of you and your son. And I at the start of every Star Trek game, I said, "Look, I'm not a Trekkie. I don't know the world, the universe of Star Trek. I've seen a few episodes, quite a few episodes, but I can't tell you which number and all that stuff." Also, the same thing with the Star Trek Adventures. I want to run a game that's a little bit more light, that faster, that works faster, and using all the little rules is not the kind of game I want to run. But I like the rules as they are. I like the the rule mechanic, the 2D20 mechanic, the momentum, that idea. But this does a vicious attack. Sure, if you want to look it up and see what that does, I'll add it to the rules or to the situation. But But if you want to see, like, if you come to my games and you want to see how that game is run, like rules as written, you're not coming to my game for that.
Well, most Trekkies will just go with the flow and tell you exactly what they think about that and how it actually works when it comes to shields and stuff like that, which is where Saul had a problem with me, Augustine, and Chris. Because we're like, that's not the way the shields work.
It didn't say anything about shields in the play. This was a play test, by the way. So, you guys. So, leave me alone. Anyway, I explicitly, especially Star Trek, I tell them, look, I am not a Trekkie. If I get something wrong, it's my fault. I just don't know the universe as well as possibly some of you here, and I can tell that you're Trekkies.
Since you showed up to the game dressed in a Star Trek uniform,
I'm a little bit intimidated.
I just want to make sure you realize this.
But I think most people who are fans like that, like I run a Conan, if I run a Conan game or I run any kind of game that is IP material, I think most people will let me slide on rules, or not even the rules, but on the IP, the intellectual property knowledge set.
And especially if it comes to Conan or Star Trek, if they are really versed in it, they will add to you. They will tell you exactly the way they think it should be, or this is the way that it works in the show. I don't know if you want to use this, but this is what I know.
Luckily for me, a lot of people who are they're such fans, they're just glad to be able to be playing my game.
It's true.
It's Star Trek enough that it's enough for them to be quiet and play the game.
It's true.
And I, if you want a full table at any convention, run a Star Trek game. No matter what rule set you're talking about, there's been I don't know how many different types of role playing games rules for Star Trek. I run Star Trek Adventures, and every time I have a full table. In fact, more than a full table, and mainly because there's just not enough games to go around, and those fans are really happy to play in those games.
It's true.
So if you really want, this is just aside from telling the GM he's wrong, if you want to run a game and have a full table at any convention, run a really popular IP.
And even if you don't know the rules so well, or you do know the rules, come up with people who may know things that you don't know.
Right.
Because some people are really into their intellectual properties that they like.
Right. In fact, one time when I was running Star Trek Adventures, the guy had the rule book, and then he goes, "Oh, this is what this means." Like, because he asked me what does vicious mean on a weapon. I go, "I think it does extra damage." So then he looked it up. He goes, "Yes, it does extra damage." I go, "Cool, I was right." So I mean, I had read the rules, but it was still early on in the system that I hadn't memorized everything.
So I would say that most of the time, if a GM is wrong, or you think a GM is wrong, just read the situation. If you know the person and you know how they're going to react to you going, I don't think that's the way the rule is, then you know whether to tell them in the middle of the game. And you don't want to interrupt the flow of the game either, right?
Right.
That's a lot of times people say go with it until the end of the game and then have the discussion. But most GMs I've found are willing to go through the rules with you, look it up, and figure it out.
Right, and it depends on how big the situation is, right?
Yeah.
Like if it's something like, oh, I don't hit this time because of this rule or not rule, or the rule is or isn't applied, you can wait till the end of the game. But if it's something that's going to keep occurring to your character, like this guy in his spiritual hammer, maybe I would say, hold on, and stop the game, because it's going to have a fundamental impact on the rest of the game.
And that's when you say, I'm confused. I thought that this is what my character could do.
Right, and
this is what I read.
Especially if you quote the
what am I missing?
How did I get it wrong?
Yes. And then there you go. So
I think that tact, you could be really successful
because you're diffusing the situation.
Right.
You're not coming across.
You're not accusatory.
You're not being accusatory. You're questioning, and you are showing that you're not sure. But even if you do know that this is the way the rule is, right? You're coming across as the one going, I have a question. I thought that this was what it was supposed to do.
Right.
Why am I not being able to do this?
Right. And I think that goes a long ways.
Yeah.
But you know what? Also know that the GMs are not all knowing, no matter how they seem, no matter how what a good face they put out. So be nice when they make an error, and I think that that will definitely help you when you bring something up to the GM. No matter what the situation, before the game, after the game, or real quick in the game. Oh, I thought my weapon did this amount of damage. Okay, and that's something that you can handle in game, or usually when there's usually a break sometime in the
Yeah.
middle of the game. So bring it up then, and I think you'll be more successful that way as a player.
There you go. Good luck.
Good
This
luck.
is Gaming Perspectives with
Saul,
and Jolene.
you have a good day.